Hello. Yes. Welcome everyone to the Bicolore and this exhibition that we opened yesterday, Liminal Objects. I'm very happy to introduce you to the first talk in this exhibition, moderated by the curator Ane Lynge-Jorlén. And we're so lucky to have 3 of the 8 Nordic artists who exhibit in this collective exhibition with us tonight. So Louise Lyngh Bjerregaard from Denmark, Fredrik Tjærandsen from Norway, and Hytönen from Finland. And I'll let you introduce the artist. And so sit and enjoy. There's possibility to ask questions afterwards, and we are also very happy to serve you a drink in the kitchen behind, so you can talk to everyone after the talk.
Lovely. And this is on? Yeah. Yeah, this is on. Can you all hear me? Yes, loud and clear. Thank you all for coming. It's a joy to see you. As Rebecca said, we had the opening last night, which was an amazing turnout, almost too much of a success to actually see the works. So, but thank you all for coming. And the idea about this evening is to really extend the ideas behind the works on display. And I'm not going to talk so much about the exhibition tonight, because the limelight is on the work and the minds behind the work that we have on our stellar panel here tonight. This talk is really about looking at and exploring the idea of the experimental within fashion, and how these lovely designers are working with more of an artistic practice within the fashion industry. So many of the works on display are experimental and transgressional in the sense that they deviate from the common societal norms of how fashion is perceived. Please come in. Yeah. And in which context they are featured, and how they are worn, and how they're made. And so you all connected, your works are all connected by the experimental quality, but in diverse ways, obviously. So I'd say that each of you belong to a generation of experimental designers that experiments with materials, the building blocks of fashion, how fashion is made, how it's shaped, and you use conventional and upcycled materials, all materials that is associated with another field. So this conversation, I'm hoping that we can unpack your work in your words, and also explore how your progressional ideas take form. And really asking, is there a place for the experimental within the fashion industry? But obviously, first, introductions, and I'm going to read here. Next to me, we have Ane Hytönen, who's a Finnish artist and fashion designer based in Paris. Ane's work you can see at the very beginning of the exhibition. Ane uses traditional handmade craftsmanship techniques that fuses delicate knits and fetish influenced pieces in reclaimed leather with experimental technologies that imitate and react to the functions of the body. Ane won the Grand Prix de Jury Première Vision and the Audience Award 2022 at the 37th Year Festival. Ane now works for a prominent Parisian fashion house, and hoping to hear more about that. Sandwiched by 2 lovely ladies, we have Fredrik Tjærandsen, who is a Norwegian designer and artist based in London. Fredrik works at the intersection of conceptual design, art and fashion, and he's widely recognized for his inflatable latex body bubbles that won him the L'Oréal Professional Young Talent Award at the graduate show of Central St. Martin's in 2019. Fredrik works across theatre, dance and performance, and you can see Fredrik's impressive inflated work there. Danish designer, Louise Lyngh Bjerregaard is the founder and artistic director of her eponymous Paris-based label. Founded on craftsmanship and obsession with textiles and artistic knitwear, Louise has a strong focus on technical sensibility and upcycling. Central to Louise's practice is uniting art, fashion, and subversion, and she's known for blurring the boundaries between couture and prêt-à-porter. And Louise also does creative consultancy for other labels and high-end clients. So I'm so excited to have you here, and there's so many things I want to talk about with you, but I actually think it would be great just to establish the foundation of, the most fundamental question is, why did you want to become a fashion designer? And I think that's in a way important to just establish for understanding how you work as a fashion designer. So I don't know if we can, you have all degrees in fashion design, so perhaps we can start with you, Louise. What made you decide to become a fashion designer in the first place?
I actually, my microphone is fine? No.
Well, just speak, they will figure it out.
I actually did not want to become a fashion designer, and I tried to do my best to not become one.
Yeah?
So in that sense, I kind of tried all sorts of other areas. So I worked at a music label.
Din mikrofon er muted.
Yeah, I just muted it because it started to.
She has a new one, so it's all good. She has a new mic.
Long story short, I interned with seven different labels across United States and in Denmark and London, etc., and sort of quickly came to terms with the struggles that it came with. So I tried to sort of explore other avenues, worked at a music label, ended up working with Lady Gaga with a side project of my own involving clothing. And then from there, it kind of took its natural course. And then at some point, I realized, okay, obviously this is inevitable to me, that this is the path. So if I have to do it for the rest of my life, I sort of have to start enroll in university or in school to become good at it. So I sort of experienced a quick rise to fame really early in my career, working with Lady Gaga. And then I sort of discarded that project and went back to school and started from scratch. And now I'm here.
Okay. Handing over to you, Fredrik. I mean, why did you want to become a fashion designer?
Well, is my mic on?
Yeah,
just
it's good.
a
It's
sound
all
check.
good. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just since I was a child, I was always very creative. I grew up spending my time always sort of making things, and I guess like a common thing about all of these objects and all of these small projects that I made for myself in my childhood was that it always related to the body. So like in my childhood home, there are all of these like relics of like variations and of the body, basically. It could be like a small baby, or it could be like human beings, you know, in different proportions. And growing up being a teenager, I continued to work with the body. I eventually got like quite obsessed with fashion, really, through music and through the designers at the time that were showing work, and I was just so fascinated by fashion, like as a medium, and again, like working with fabrication around the body, using the body as a type of like a canvas, basically, to create things and to relate ideas and objects to. So then I was like, yeah, I'm gonna become a fashion designer, and I basically just Googled my way to like how do I do that. I just looked at the designers that I looked up to at the time, just like what did they do. And then I saw that like Central St. Martin's was the place to go to study fashion. So that became my ambition. Like I really wanted to get into this school. I wanted to study fashion. And yeah, I worked really hard to like build a portfolio to apply to this BA course. And I ended up doing a foundational course at Central St. Martin's before doing my bachelor there. And I always had like a plan B, like if I didn't get into this course, like I would study sculpture instead. But yeah.
Which makes sense looking at your work.
Yeah. I mean, so I mean that's like my journey in short, I guess, of how I started studying fashion, and then where I'm at now.
And Jenny, why did you decide to become a fashion designer?
Well, I have to say, I think I have been very naive from the start. My first contact with fashion was like fashion imagery from fashion magazines, and I was always like fascinated about the story. It was all about like the setting and the models and like the whole mood, because it was just like something that like touched me very deeply, and I always like dreamed like what would be to be a part of like something so beautiful.
I remember you telling me that you also had this fascination about the Aalto University,
Yeah,
which
also,
is a very
so
renowned.
that kind of like, that's how I applied to Aalto University, and then I studied fashion there, and then moved to Paris, and now I'm here.
Living the dream.
Yeah, living the dream, the actual fashion fantasy. Yeah.
So now, not many, but some years down the road, is that passion or initial interest intact, or has it been tainted? Louise?
I fucking love it. I think you grow into it. I think like the reason I didn't want to do it was because I was aware of that it's not all glamour. And I'm sure you all know, if you're in fashion somehow, that it's really hard work, and obviously we all know this. But I think what makes me continue through the hard times is that it's so rewarding.
When it works.
In the atelier, you know, when we create something, it's the adrenaline and the joy it's a high you can't get from somewhere else. And not that I know that, but.
What about you, Fredrik? Is the passion intact?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, I've kind of like taken a different route to like, in terms of how I produce and make and show my work. But like I still work with the body and the fabrication around it. And like I'm also like such a nerd on fashion, you know, like on like the technical side of it and textile. Like I love going to like fashion exhibitions and like really studying different types of design. So I'm trying to take that with me in what I do now.
And you, Jenny?
Well, it's always like when the fantasy comes to reality, it's not always the same. But there is always like a small moments.
Do we need to change the microphone? Can perhaps, Louise, you can share your microphone with
Yeah,
Jenny?
probably.
We switch hers off.
I'll get another one.
Yeah. So we would,
Remember to talk.
yeah, right into the microphone. And so going back to the glittery images of the fashion magazine that you're now,
Yeah,
that become a reality?
I have to spoil you guys, it's not the same.
We'll come back.
But there is like, end of every project, there is like this one magical moment that's just like drives us to go further.
Frog.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, great. Fredrik, let's start by talking about your crescent work, which we see behind the audience here, which is a development, a white version of a black version that you created for your graduate collection at St. Martin's. The adjacent film is a collaboration with Show Studio. I'm so curious because latex is such a fragile material, and I imagine a lot of testing and trial and error went into actually developing these shapes. Another thing is that latex is a material that is largely associated with a different culture, namely being, you know, bondage culture, which can include breath play and latex vacuum pieces. And the reason why I mentioned that obviously there's a sense of materiality, but your work seems to derive from a completely different space, I imagine. And so perhaps you can just, a more serene space. How did you come up with working with latex? What was it about latex that led you to start working with it?
I think I remember like when I was in my BA, like we had a placement year where I was interning in Paris for Balenciaga actually, and I remember I was going to the archive and kind of looking at all of their like latex pieces, and there's something about the material that really interests me, like this like plastic quality that it has, how it responds to light. It comes in very different thicknesses and transparencies. And yeah, I don't know, something with me like really resonates with this material because it's so versatile in so many ways. But yeah, you're right. Like it has such a culture around it.
Yeah.
Like it's such a sexualized material. It's either like fetish, bondage, or even medical. It's the connotations you have to the material. So yeah, when I was developing my graduate collection, I was looking for a material that was transparent and had like a foggy sensation to it. I wanted to create garments that gave this illusion that you were in an unclear space, basically. And I explored many different materials, like silicone, like different types of PVC and plastic. And I eventually went back or started exploring the idea of using latex. And my graduate collection is sort of based on like a personal, quite introspective concept, and using latex, like I felt was quite like I don't know. I felt like it was interesting to use latex in a non-sexual way,
Yeah.
or like in a maybe more intellectual way, and without referencing like anything that it's done in the past, and rather pushing it in this new direction.
That makes complete sense when looking at your work, because well, perhaps it's just me, I'm revealing my references, but I don't feel that this has a sexual reference. I feel that this is a material that will allow you to explore shape.
Yeah.
And looking at the video next to it, where you work with more transparent and thinner latex, and this is a more solid latex work, you can really see on the video how the shape of the form will change, and it at your show it was almost like it was a performance, because it came in inflated, and the models had like cords that they attached within the bubble, and then they released it, so it transformed into a dress, which is sort of a very poetic presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And again, like I was very conscious all the way through, like to not kind of make it like sexy in a way, or to not make it like something that it was not. I mean, just releasing it to the internet, like there was obviously a lot of different reactions, and a lot of it, it becomes sexualized, fetishized anyway. But yeah, I hope that I could kind of show like a new way of using it, pushing this material further, because it is really like an amazing material, and also this fragility that it has also makes it even like poetic, I think. Like you really have to nurture this material. If you buy a latex piece, you have to know how to take care of it. You kind of have to feed it this this oil to keep the garment for a long time. Otherwise, it will just become brittle and fall apart. So you really have to like...
It's like a skin.
Yeah. You have to like moisturize it. Yeah.
Great. And Jenny, you're featured in the other room, as I said, with two pieces, the spiky head, which is the first piece that you will see when entering the exhibition, which was developed specifically for the Year Festival, and the other two pieces are part of your graduate collection from the Aalto University. And I really like the balance with your work, that there's this extreme sort of hardcore fetish hardware quality, which is paired to this really fragile undercurrent. And I don't know if we can talk us through what is it with this clash of, themes or materials even. How do you work with the fragile and the soft compared to all the bolts and the leather?
Well, I don't know. I have been always like fascinated by like extreme contrasts in a way. I think it has something to do with like my early passions of like film photography as well, because you really have to think about like things as like black and white. And I think I see most of the things that I do through like meshes like the textures more than just like. So that's just like a superficial view, but also I think it's very like fertile, like ground to combine like very different backgrounds when you are doing research for your fashion collections. It has like a lot of like poetic and things that you can just like think about the work.
One of the work, which is called the Cyborg Bride, on the work on the left with the long knitted veil, is fishing line knitted on a domestic knitting machine. And I know that there are 20,000 individually, manually hand-placed beats. So I want to just, that's a very laborious process, right? It takes time, and there's something about time that I think you must be so in the zone when creating work like that.
Well, I don't know if I'm in zone, but I think I might be a little bit crazy as well. But for me, it's more like also my work. I don't want to like advertise it like this, but it's also my own quiet way to kind of like protest against the fast fashion movement that is like. So it's my own quiet, rebellious act.
And that's something you share here, like the investment in craft, and craft takes time. Yeah. What comes first for you when you start developing a collection? Is it the material that you see the fishing line, you think about how can I knit it, or is it the shape, or is it an integrated kind of process?
It's always about the story. I have something I want to tell, and then I have the skeleton of the idea, and then I kind of like try to start like draping around it.
So
until
there's a story behind it.
Yeah, until it has a flesh on its own.
Great. Louise, you're right behind us. Everyone can see it. You're displaying 3 looks in knitwear and leather based on this crinoline lamp shape. And in addition to these looks, you have a glass cabinet with some objects as well. And I'm also curious about your creative process and how you, an open question, how do you develop the work?
I think at this
Is it on? Take Jenny's.
Yes. I think at this point in my career, I have to be very... that's going to be a meme. It's going to go viral like this. I think at this point, in my career, I have to have a method to developing collections because everything happens so fast. Yeah. And as a young emerging designer, and obviously, as you said, I work as a consultant on the side for houses and clients, you have to sort of be able to perform at a really high level at a really short amount of time. So going from, dreaming collections to sort of taking my time developing them, I had to come up with a method to sort of communicate to a team and to go from A to B really fast. And I think what's really special to my atelier and my way of working is that I work communicative with my design team, and in general with everyone in my team are really close to me. So from the beginning, I've had a very analog process of always being displayed to fabrics and yarns, so we can always be fed colors and textures and shapes. And then it's sort of like I can be on my way to the kitchen or to the bathroom, and then I'm exposed to the fabric, and then someone is sitting and working on something else, and I'm like, could this be a shoulder in this kind of fabric? And then the person maybe, replies back to me, yeah, but maybe what about the technique? And then it's like, okay, maybe it could be a hip instead, and then it's a waist, and then it's sort of, we have big whiteboards where it's like we make sure to write everything down so nothing is lost, because then you get a phone call from DHL, and then, that idea, could have been brilliant, but it got lost on its way to the bathroom.
Quote of the evening.
So in that sense, it's a very collaborative effort where I'm also trying to engage a new generation in a critical way of thinking about approaching shape, and always question, you know, why is it a crinoline with a deadstock fox, and why is the threads hanging loose, and why is it like, what justifies this shape in this sort of material, and what makes it interesting? Because I think at the end of the day, one thing is to create a dream for yourself and to see it alive, but at some point you also, for me, I feel a responsibility in moving this slowness forward in the fashion segment, in where I'm sitting. And I think the way of like me handing over sketches doesn't really work the way I work. So I think every day has to be a good day, and every day has to feed its own energy and learning, facilitate learning. And I think you do that by not necessarily collaborating 100%, because I still have a structure of being an artistic director, and that's my job, and that's what pays the bills. But I think I'm only as good as my team. So in that sense, I really enjoy opening up for facilitating conversations, and sometimes I'm also super fortunate to learn something myself, and I think that way of working is really precious in a system that's known for a really strict hierarchy.
You mentioned, you know, methods, how you work, and that sort of leads me on to, you know, methodology. And a big thing in your work is working with pre-loved materials or upcycled or waste materials from the industry. And obviously I presume that involves a huge assessment of each piece. How can I use that piece in a creative way? How do you work with waste and pre-loved materials?
I think so. Obviously, from the beginning of my career, it came from a financial point of view, and I did knitwear at Central St. Martin's really briefly. Like, I was there for 3 weeks. I didn't have any money to buy the yarn from the yarn store because it's really expensive in the UK. I'm sure you know. So I was fortunate to kind of access the discarded yarn room, and sort of so it took place from or it took its beginning from a financial perspective. And now that I have to accommodate retailers and to be able to produce in bigger quantities, I've worked with LVMH, Nona Sauce, where they are selling, it's not a commercial for Nona Sauce, but they're selling, they're allowing you to B2B purchase, and also for fashion students actually, their dead stock from their collections. And right now I'm working with Chanel's Métier d'Art on the same. So in that sense, a big quantity for me is a roll of fabric of 50 meters or 500 meters, but that's a tiny, that's like nothing to them. They can't use this. So in that sense, it feeds into, it's now sort of like a system in my practice that came from financial measures, and now it's at the core, no matter what. And I think you touch base on consultancy. When I worked with Jacquemus, I was also able to integrate dead stock from his factories into the work that we did. And I think that's a really precious way of bringing that sort of theme forward on a bigger scale. Mm. Because I think scaling fashion and being able to accommodate retailers, that's always their question when you work with sustainability. It's like, are you able to deliver, or are you going to run out of yarn or...
I think you touched on something that we need to discuss in the panel at large, because, you know, we can talk so much about experimentation and creative vision, but it's notoriously hard to be an emerging fashion designer with any big budgets. And I think there's something to be said about how creativity and how experimentation goes hand in hand with limited budgets. So perhaps we can just talk about that, if that's something that fuels the creativity, Fredrik, being broke.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. Like, I think like working with limitations is it always like makes you think differently about the materials you use. I have it like now. I'm working a lot with like performance productions, for example, and like there's not a lot of budget there, and so I find myself like really looking for like second-hand materials, you know, like if it's like a backdrop or something, like you can kind of, like at the moment I'm working on a piece where I'm designing scenography and costume for this dance piece, and we need a huge backdrop that we're gonna paint and like to create this sort of landscape. And it's like a backdrop costs like thousands of pounds, and then I've found one on eBay for like 100, you know, that has wine stains on it. So yeah, I mean, definitely like yeah, I work with these like performance projects, and that's like the projects that I want to do. They're the most like creatively like expressive projects. But then like I balance that also with doing like commercial projects to kind of get the money in to fund my practice. And yeah, and those projects can be, yeah, I do a lot of different things. And then, yeah, I just kind of hide these like really tacky commercial projects, and then
we all do.
present to the world like the projects that really mean something to me and that really represents my work. Did that answer the question?
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I want to hear from you, Jenny, because I know if we can just share the microphone with Jenny. Yes, and I know about your bolts for the leather jacket, but perhaps you can just share that again with us. You know how you drove the hardware shops in Helsinki crazy. Is it on?
No, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're broke, you have to find out new ways to do things. So I wasn't able to buy studs because they were too expensive. So actually, I bought all the bolts and nuts in whole Helsinki. So thank you, Korauta.
And what about fishing line? Is that also a question of financial limitation, or is that just you thinking, why don't I just knit with fishing line?
I think it's also like, well, of course, budget-wise, it's nylon. It's very durable, and it kind of just like fitted the concept, I have to say.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we have seen your work here, and some of us might know your previous work as well. And the reason why I think you're brilliant in this context is obviously because your work, I feel, has this experimental quality. So I'm interested in knowing whether it's something that you deliberately work with. Are you deliberately working with the borders of fashion, pushing the envelope? It seems as if what you share is testing the materials. You have a huge sort of research process behind you. I don't know if this is a question, but I mean, are you deliberately experimenting, trying to test the limits of how you can dress a body or how you can stretch a material? Anyone?
You guys can go ahead as well. I think it's like at some point you're done testing your parents, and then you have to sort of like test something else, right? I think, no, I think for I can only speak for myself, of course, but it's not something that happens on purpose. I think it's sort of like you go somewhere, and then you find yourself at the edge. But it's kind of, for me, it's a safe space, and it's a safe place to be, and it's where I thrive, and it happens to be on the edge. And then it's fortunate enough to maybe push some boundaries, but I don't intentionally go to push a boundary. I would love to just stay in a cozy house and be home by 4 and, just make some tea. But yeah.
Yeah, like I think in my case, like I try to push boundaries, like I'm like I guess like with what I do, having this background in fashion and then kind of going into designing spaces and designing more like experiences. I guess I'm trying to push boundaries in a sense that I'm trying to do fashion differently. Working with identity and how we relate to space and what we wear differently. So I guess I am trying to actively push it into something else. Rather than, I don't know, I never like made commercial products in the forms of like garments that I sell. I'm kind of selling these concepts in a way. These concepts in form of that's the idea, not the actual thing. So yeah, I guess that's my way of pushing it, and I'm trying to actively push it. Yeah.
What about you, Jenny?
It's okay. I have to say I'm not doing it like consciously, but it just like happens, and maybe it has something that because I'm a young designer and I have thoughts of my own, and I'm not doing things super like commercially. So of course there's like a meaning to it, and then the story.
I'm also curious about, you know, we all involved in our work, regardless of whether we are creative or not. I mean, but we also all have a working process, and that process can sometimes be a process of agony and pain, and sometimes it can be really inspiring and fruitful. And where do you stand? Is that process of creation a joyful moment for you?
I have to say sometimes it's like super painful, but I think it has something in my personality because I'm such a perfectionist, so, and also very like masochistic, you know, certain ways. So it is a challenge, but I also get a pleasure too.
Yeah. It's a double-edged sword. Yes. What about you guys? Is that creative process when you're in the zone, is it like that double thing of it being painful and being rewarding at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, it's you go.
No, go ahead.
I mean, it's yeah. I mean, it's a struggle, you know. Like it's painful, but we're still managing to produce new creative outcome in what we do, and like that's rewarding in itself, I think, to be able to express yourself through our work. But yeah, it's hard work to get there.
I think for me it's everything around that's really painful. And then my refuge is in the creation. And sometimes it becomes too much, and then you only live for a very short moment of joy or seeing the light. But I think, and that's also why I don't intentionally, like, I don't want to push the boundary, because I think pushing the boundary with what I do, which is not I think it's easier in your work with, you know, to see that it's pushing some boundaries where I'm maybe not on the commercial side, but I think people relate more to a wearable garment. Sometimes looking at knitwear, for example, that is not fishing line knitwear. And then I'm met with a lot of preconceived ideas and perceptions that it's not for them, or it doesn't fit into an establishment or a structure, and that sort of like that setting can be extremely isolating and very lonely, and at the same time you receive maybe, you know, a lot of glamorous headlines in the media, and you're invited to a lot of things, but at the end of the day it's a lonely journey, I think, to push boundaries in fashion. But I also think if you have the opportunity and you have this sort of internal drive, I don't like to call it a gift because it's also a curse. I think, but if you have this within you and you took the first steps down that road, you sort of also have to, for other people who also wish to do the same or feel a need to do the same, you have to kind of push through and push those boundaries. But I think, so for me it's everything around that's really painful, and then except for the atelier.
I mean, I often find myself as a curator of experimental fashion that I have to explain or try and say, is this fashion or is this art? And it can become quite tiring to have this conversation, because in a way it doesn't really matter to me. It's the quality of the work, regardless of the label. And I don't know how if you also experience being trained as fashion designers, but working with artistic practice, whether you feel that you have to oversimplify or justify. I'm looking at you now, Jenny. What it is that you do.
Well, yeah, it's hard because kind of like, yeah, I have to say my family has no idea what I'm doing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
I think you also, Louise, touched on something that you get media attention, and I think it's fair to say that the three of you have had your moments of being media darlings, and that doesn't necessarily, you know, translate into being a successful business, right? And I think, you know, standing at fashion being, you know, an artistic thing, but within a more perhaps commercial realm. How do you deal with that, or how do you explain your work? Do you feel that you need to explain your work?
I actually just got the advice last week from a person in Paris to not give a anymore about what other people like, because I've been in the place of like, is it artisanal prêt-à-porter or is it couture? And then I had to accommodate one calendar and then the other calendar, and then, you know, I had to do consultancy, so I had to skip a season, and so I think. But I actually want to say that this is what this exhibition is touching on. It's the liminal, because I think we're all on our way to somewhere, but we already made it. I made it to, like, I've pushed the boundaries of knitwear. I facilitated a whole series of new knitwear designers, like, in the past 4 years. And it was an active choice to not pursue a knitwear direction for me, even though maybe it would have been a financial, more profitable arena for me. But I think, so in that sense, I think we should also celebrate where we are right now, because we made it so far. And it's a tough journey to make it to this point. Yeah. And I think we're constantly measured with, you know, the LVMH, the Kering, the revenues, you know, there's always someone new in the media, there's always a new talent. And I think it's very important to also protect yourself a bit as an artist, because you are exposed to a lot of opinions, you are exposed to seasons, you're exposed to a financial structure that is one of the biggest in the world, and that is making profit out of young talents. So in that sense, Ane, you once gave me an advice years ago that was like, stay in your own lane. Don't focus so much on what everyone else is doing. Just stay in your own lane and focus on doing your own work and do it really well. And I think, I think so the liminal represents this really well for all three of us, I think.
Happy you say that. What about you, Fredrik?
Yeah, sorry.
Do you feel that you have to explain your work, you being a fashion designer but working with artistic practice? Is that something people understand? Or do you feel that you're stigmatized because you're not trained as an artist, but you're trained as a fashion designer, but you work with an artistic expression?
100%. Like, I think it's like, I mean, moving on to more, moving away from fashion, you know, and calling myself more and more artist, you know. I do find it hard, like, having the fashion background, because like you either one or the other, you know. Like it's like I've done some exhibitions now in space, and I'm always sort of represented as the fashion designer, which is fine. Like, I mean, I am sort of trying to move away from it, or sort of yeah, like. But then again, it is what it is in a way. To push. Should I just?
Can you mute Fredrik's microphone?
I'll turn it off.
Do we need to do it manually and then you switch to the other one?
I just turn it off, so it should be okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, as I was saying, like, having the background in fashion, you know, like, and even like when I'm now that I've done like the last year, because I want to produce new projects, I apply a lot for funding, for example, and then again, like, to apply for like a fine art grant is hard, like when you come from a design background even, because it's confusing, you know. Even looking at your CV, like you studied fashion, like you done fashion internships and have had fashion jobs. But I think it's like an art that I've kind of like feel like I've starting to master now, is how to word myself in my background and my artistic experience and practice, and yeah, I'm presenting it in this sort of multidisciplinary light.
Yeah.
It's actually working now. I see. Yeah. So yeah, that answers the question.
I think it really resonates also. I mean, I run a non-profit organization for Nordic emerging talents, and I think we're applying for grants that, you know, artists and artistic organizations get, but we sort of fall between the stools because, I mean, the work that we present is artistic, but it's created by designers. So I do feel that there's still that stigma, which is so old-fashioned, because it should be about the work, but that's perhaps just another agenda for another talk. But I think, you know, it leaves me with the question of how does the experimental sit within the fashion industry? Does it sit easily?
It depends on how many times you get copied, right?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's Jenny, what do you say?
Like, I don't know, like, I think fashion industry, it's like feeds from like experimental things, but at the same time it's not like, well, everything is super commercialized now, so, well, it's a struggle.
And fashion has this inbuilt, you know, renewal. It's all about newness for the sake of newness. And I think that's something I said that in my speech yesterday. I think your subversion also lies in the fact that you reject the label of newness. That's something that I don't necessarily associate with what you do. It's more like an artistic exercise, experimenting, finding out about your practice. How do you deal with how do you work around newness in your work? Louise, perhaps you having your own label.
That's a really good question. I don't necessarily search for the new, but I think being attentive to being an attentive person to, it's going to maybe sound abstract, but to vibrations, and it coming from, like, for example, we never look at Pinterest at my studio, because what you take in, like what you see in your everyday life and what you feed yourself into, you subconsciously take in, and suddenly 2 months down the line, you're going to find yourself having made something, but you actually picked it up from Pinterest, which is a closed loop of inspiration for those who doesn't know, and really great for home decor. But but so I think we all create newness, and I think that's obviously I try always to create something that doesn't exist, because I don't get pleasure in creating something. I can take notions from tailoring, which is a big part of my background, and but I don't really, I try not to look at other designers, and I try not to look at collections, and I actually try not to go to fashion exhibitions. It can give me anxiety, first and foremost, to kind of feel that I should be in the atelier working, and that I should, you know, have done this, or, you know, if I see brilliant pieces. It took me a while to kind of recognize that there's enough for everyone. But I think the search for newness just appears. I think if you're trying to sort of make your own way through it and listen to yourself and not to listen to anyone else, or to sort of try to follow trends. And I think it's much more fun to be part of creating trends, or to have been 2 years in advance. Of course, it's a bit difficult not to capitalize on it, but then I think you have to use your creativity to sort of find other ways to then make that kind of, you know, to close the gap financially. And I think in that sense it's brilliant to be creative, because it kind of forces you to find new ways. And I think maybe in that search is where the newness appears.
Yep. Okay, so I guess we're at the point where I would say thank you so much for sharing. It's been great hearing how you deal with working, and the struggles and the pain and the agony, and in all big, wonderful mix. And we have time for questions from the floor if you have any. So, yes, please.
Well, just a question on you're all in the creative industry, so you're creating new things all the time. I was just curious how it works when it comes to intellectual property, because when you have a good idea or you use a fabric or something unique, typically the revenue or the big brands, they make the money on that. I'm just curious whether you think about it or whether you don't consider it or whether you look at it later. I'm in the watch industry and we train the people to school from the watchmaking sector to not give their ideas away too early because the big brands tend to use it. I'm just curious what your line of thinking is on that side.
Right. Yeah, I had it like with my graduate collection actually, like because when I released it, it went really viral, and I got a lot of attention for it, and a lot of people was interested in my work. And then from my school, I got like legal advice actually, and they taught me about intellectual property. I had never heard the word intellectual property until after I graduated. But yeah, like it's you really have to think about like trademarking your work, protecting it, and then also with the projects that you do, it's like, yeah, like reading the contract, you know. It's not really like a very good advice. I mean, that was my like I never really thought about it until I graduated. I don't know, Louise, like what's your experience with like IP?
I think I do actually. Thank you for the question. I think it's a very relevant question. I sit on different legs in this question because now I'm at a point where I have a fashion lawyer, and she trademarks everything. The minute it's done in the atelier, it's being trademarked, and it's being filed by the courts of France, etc. I've witnessed very early my work being copied by very big houses, and some were called out online, and others kind of. And it took a lot of my energy mentally, and you obviously are exposed to the idea that you could have made a lot of money on this. So in that sense, it's kind of, I think for me, it starts as you're really angry, you know, you're at home, you're kind of like, you hate, you know, the world for being like this. And then a journalist once gave me an advice, and it was a big house who wanted to, in a contract, they wanted to buy the rights to different techniques that I did and different silhouettes that I did. And it was very small in the contract of like more than 100 pages. And I sort of needed the money to fund a show. So this journalist that I then happened to spoke to and off the record, she was like, if you give away your best work, that's the only way you can force yourself to create something even better. Because if you gatekeep what they want in terms of techniques and silhouettes and what you consider, and I was like, you have to, if I release this on a runway in 1 month, it's gonna be my cash cow. That's gonna, you know, buy me an apartment, it's gonna sort of give me a pension, all these things that you have to take into consideration. But she was like, the only way you can create even better work is by removing that ceiling and giving them this and take the money and do a show and move on. So I did that. And I actually argued a little bit with him in the contract, and then we cut things in half. And then that's, but what Fredrik says, it's really important to read the contracts. I did a short distinct in international business law to sort of, because I knew if I was gonna set myself up on my own, I wouldn't be able to afford a lawyer. So I had to be smart enough myself to be able to read a contract and to negotiate. Another thing is that I've had a lot of interns in my atelier who's really worried about, because Instagram is such a big exposure like platform, and you can make it or break it basically if you post your work. But there can also be a person that sees your work before the house or the headhunter or the journalist or sees your work. So the chance of being copied are really big. So I have really, really talented people from all sorts of schools around the world who are too afraid to post their work simply because it's really, really good, but everybody's online all the time and looking for inspiration. So I think at some point you have to cut your losses, move on, and then know that if somebody wants to take your work, you can just do even better. And then at some point when you have the money, you just file for trademarks, basically. And then you can sue people back 5 years, in France at least. And then at the end of the day, it's also like, it always feels good to create the original work. It never really feels good to copy. So at the end of the day, who sleeps better? Like, who brushes the teeth better? I think it's the one who are not copying. And at the end of the day, I also think it's about integrity, right? Do you have any comments for this?
No, and I think I'm impressed by the answers because you've experienced in different phases and different things. So well done on that side. I mean, integrity, of course, is one of the key elements, and then I think the originality of your design probably is something that will, if you have it, like LVMH is just 4 letters and they have it on the bag and it's a huge thing. But I mean, no one would have ever thought that that would be the big thing. But so to a certain degree, sometimes simplicity and all your originality is, I think, what is important, I think, generally speaking, from where I stand at least.
Are there any other questions? No? Well, in that case, I'm gonna say thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It's very interesting to meet the people and the brains behind these amazing pieces that we are showing here in Le Piccolo until the 19th of May. Tell your friends to come and see it. Thank you very much, Ane, for setting this up. And thank you to you 3 for showing your pieces here.
Yeah.